back with her Hollywood highlights. This is Lexi McKinney here with the one, the only, Joe Johnson.
How are you? Glad to be back.
I'm glad to have you back. For those new listening, the one and the only, my supervisor here at ONTV, he's the best. He got a nice little break last week, which was well-deserved. He deserved that. And we kind of talked about last time, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But the cool thing is that I wanted to kind of throw a wild card episode out here and let Joe pick the movies or the theme of the week. And so we're going to be talking about some John Hughes classic films, which I'm very excited about because Joe printed out this long list. And there are so many more movies that I didn't even realize he would write or produce. And some of them are really some of my favorite holiday movies. There's a Thanksgiving movie that you can't forget about, too. We got some really great stuff to talk about today. So first and foremost, Joe, what is your favorite John Hughes film and why?
Well, that's difficult to pick just one. And that's when you proposed to me that I come up with the topic for this podcast, I'm like, I can't just do one film. We kind of have to talk about John Hughes' body of work. Keep in mind that, I graduated from high school in 1984, and a lot of his movies were coming out during that time period. And those that were considered, coming-of-age films, they spoke to me because I was living it as I was seeing it depicted on the screen. So, when you see a movie like The Breakfast Club or 16 Candles,
yes,
that really reflected me going to high school. And so me and my friends and family, we all related to these movies, and they were very personal for us. And even though John Hughes was a little older, for some reason, he got it. He saw the world through our eyes, and he bonded with his actors like Anthony
Yes.
Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald, even though they were like 16 years old at the time they were doing movies like 16 Candles. He hung out with them, and they were like all really close friends. And so somehow John Hughes just really captured the voice of that generation. So it's difficult to pick just one. I mean, there are some movies that he wrote that he didn't necessarily direct. And then, of course, there are some movies that he directed. So when it comes to movies that he wrote, one of my all-time favorites, and these are movies that are on my top 100 favorite list of all time.
You have a whole 100 top list?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to see that list.
I'm going to have to challenge you to come up with your 100. It was inspired by the American Film Institute. Back around the time when Titanic came out in 1997, the American Film Institute did their 100 greatest American films. And I'm like, I want to do that. And it was fun putting together my 100.
Super cool.
Yeah. The problem is,
hard, though.
It's
That's a
hard. Every
thing.
time I see a new movie that I love, I have to pull something off the list to add something new, and that's really, really challenging. It's pretty solid right now. I haven't added many new movies recently to that list. But one that is way up there, probably in the top 20, is National Lampoon's Vacation. The classic American cross-country road trip. Just about every family can relate to that.
Yes.
I remember my family did a road trip to Disney World in Florida.
So down
so
south.
We had I think it was a station wagon, and we had a couple of families combined, and we drove from Michigan to Florida to Disney World. And back, and there were a lot of, crazy experiences for that. So just about every family can relate to that family road trip.
Oh yeah, we can't. I was thinking about that too. And on this topic, it gets a little more personal, but how many bathroom breaks do you think that you had during a road trip down south? Because I seriously think that my family could win an award for how many times we stopped to go to the bathroom or to stop to one of those little gas stations in a really small town just to grab water and fuel and everything. But I seriously do think if there's an award for how many times you can stop on your way to go to Florida, my family would get like the top gold. We would receive gold in that category, which is so funny.
Yeah, I don't remember making any unscheduled stops. We all seem to be on the same schedule, I guess. And so, when we would stop for food or whatever we had to stop for, then, we took our break then. So, yeah, it wasn't too crazy, and nobody died along the way. We didn't have to strap Aunt Edna to the roof of the car, anything like that. So
yeah, no, that's a good sign. That means a healthy family trip down south.
Yeah.
I would say there was nothing too chaotic that happened and came out of it.
There is one story, and you just made me think of this. I haven't
Oh.
thought about this forever, but I remember there was this. My mom didn't drive. That's why we always had to, like, tag along with other families. And I remember there's this really loud, obnoxious woman who was driving the vehicle. I think her name was Jerry, I think. And I remember at one point, my sister was sitting in the back seat with her window rolled up, and the driver rolled down her window to spit for some reason.
Oh, boy.
And it came back and hit my sister's window and just went across the window, and we all stared at it like, oh, now we got to look at that for who knows how long. So it was just weird little things like that, like, ugh. But yeah,
don't be a Jerry. Don't do that. Yeah. With these films, I think one thing, and this is so terrible for me to say, but I didn't realize that he actually wrote the Home Alone movies.
Yeah.
Which was what really makes me super excited, is because I was telling you earlier, I went through on YouTube, and I love YouTube for this one reason, if not a million other. But they always can make these cool montages and put them together of iconic movies from the 80s, 90s, and like all the famous sayings that we say still now to this day. Or if you're referencing like a new movie, they'll sometimes take certain sayings or hint at certain films, and it's really cool to see that. But the Home Alone movies are like my all-time childhood classic movies, especially when he was lost in New York. For some reason, that made me fall in love with New York. And as sad as it is to say, I have never been in New York during the holiday season, which really makes me sad, because it's like I would absolutely love to walk through the hotels
See
and
the tree,
see the
Rockefeller
trees.
Center. Yeah.
Yes, and just experience my Home Alone, because when I was a kid, I was very shy, and Kevin, he just knew how to get business done. He knew how to get those thieves out of the picture, and so it really holds like a classic tradition in my home and in my grandparents' home, because they would always turn that movie on, or it would be on, at the time, it's Freeform now, but it used to be, what is that, ABC Family, like way back? It used to be, that used to be ABC Family, and now it's Freeform, I believe. But I remember they would always play Home Alone, and so to know that John Hughes made those classic movies, those spoke to my childhood, because, yeah, they were obviously out before I was this, in the age group with Kevin, but it's still just, there was something feel good about it. And like you said, especially with like The Breakfast Club, I always used to want to live through the 80s. And so I feel like that was like the best depiction of the 80s for high schoolers. How accurate do you think it was with just like the hostility too, with like the principal? Like, I feel like that was a very real thing. When I hear stories from you, when I hear stories from my dad, when I hear stories from just other family members and friends that have lived through and got to experience school, obviously, decades before I was thought of, which is sad to say. But they always said that there was that one principal that had like that snotty, like all about business. If you get in trouble, watch out.
Yeah, we didn't. I mean, our principals, we didn't dislike the principal, but I remember in high school, we kind of made fun of him behind his back. He looked like a bulldog. And so we called him Bulldog Perry behind his back.
Oh, no.
So I have memories of that. But yeah, I think Breakfast Club is really, really accurate. I don't know if you can, divide the entire student body into four main cliques like the movie did. Was there 4 or 5?
Well, I think there was
5.
5, right? Because there was the rebel, like she's like the
jock,
girly princess, the kind of outcast character,
and
then more
and
of
then
a
nerdy,
the nerdy school book smart character,
Yeah. So, yeah, you could almost break down the student body into those groups. I'm sure there were more. And one thing that I took pride in high school was I got along with all the different cliques. Like I had friends that were jocks. I was the nerd. I loved, Star Wars and playing chess and stuff like that. I was friends with everybody. So if I had to pick one character from The Breakfast Club that I related to the most, it would be Anthony Michael Hall's character of the kind of geeky guy. And the thing that kind of saddens me about Breakfast Club is they kind of paired off into couples, except for Anthony Michael Hall. He doesn't get the girl in the end, and that I could relate to that too. So, but yeah,
That's so shocking, though. Like you've got such a great personality, but I know what you mean. It was just like he was kind of the lone wolf at the end, and that's kind
Yeah,
of a bummer. I
yeah.
mean, why? He deserved love too.
And he played kind of this similar character in what is it? 16 Candles, which
Yeah.
came out I think that same
Befo-
year,
It did.
as Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
And he was a similar character in that, where he was kind of a nerdy guy who hung out with nerdy guys, and he wanted to, get involved with the Molly Ringwald character, and she said, no, there's no way. She was interested in the dreamy guy, the Jake guy. And
Yeah.
what was fascinating about that, and something that I really related to in that
Hmm.
particular movie, 16 Candles, is that when he realized that he didn't have a shot with Molly's character, he befriended her, and
Yes.
he kind of brokered the deal between Jake and Molly's character, and kind of helped bring them together. And I really admire that, and I can really relate to that. That he, instead of being jealous and trying to sabotage the relationship, he helped bring them together, and I thought that was really cool. That was a character that, like I said, I really related to. So
It was a feel good moment.
yeah.
It was a feel good moment too. One thing that I liked about 16 Candles a lot is that dynamic of she's a sophomore, right? And the older senior guy. And, it really reminded me of like my sophomore year of high school because my high school was set up so like there was like the freshman center. So the ninth graders kind of got thrown off. They were like the outcast, recluse, own school, like their own school. So you didn't really have the connection to the sophomores, the juniors, the seniors. And when I became a sophomore and transitioned into the big high school with all of the classes and everything, it was like there was always that one senior that every sophomore had a crush on. And at the time, there was actually more than one. I mean, there would just be so many. I remember when I used to do competitive dance, one of the older seniors in my group, she had a boyfriend, and I thought he was so cute. And I was like, "Oh, you're so lucky! You have such a cute boyfriend." But there was always that one, and at my high school, one I can remember is everybody liked this guy Jake.
Isn't that his name in the
Isn't
movie?
ironic?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Jake, I guess Jakes just have that stereotype. I don't know.
I guess.
It must be very accurate still to this day. Maybe it's like Jake in a new Jake's body. I don't know, or something crazy like that.
I just
But
read something recently that when the actor who played Jake, auditioned for the role,
mhm.
they weren't sure if they wanted to cast him or not. I think there were some other people that were up for it, but they said like the women that were part of the casting people just thought he was so dreamy, and they're like, I think this will work on the big screen. And of course it did.
Oh,
And
it was super successful.
yeah, and he
Mhm.
was like, his character was a nice guy, so you were kind of rooting for those two to get together. I hate movies when girls fall for the jerk,
The bad
guy, the
guy,
bad
yeah.
boy. Yeah. So it's nice to see that, despite his dreaminess, you still rooted for Jake to get the girl.
You do, and that's my favorite part about these movies, and the one thing that never changes with like rom-coms, especially because these kind of set the scene, I think, for a lot of the great films that we have to this day, that have come out in the past 10 years, past decade. But there's always that feel-good rom-com romance, and you're always rooting for the underdog, and I love that feeling because I think we can all relate a little bit. I mean, in high school, it's challenging too because you are coming of age and you want something to relate to, and sometimes when you are in high school, you're in your teen years, you're trying to figure out your life, even though you're not really supposed to have everything figured out. But the biggest thing is you want to feel like you belong somewhere, or
Oh,
belong
sure.
to someone, or have some sort of connection. And so, in a lot of these films, I guess you could say there is that really great moment that you do get to see, like the romantic. They run off in the sunset together. They're happy in their own unique ways, and I think John Hughes really did a great job complimenting and making sure that it was accurate and there was positivity. Because nowadays, some of the rom coms that I've seen have not ended that way. There's been
Yeah.
like there was one in particular, and of course I'm not going to remember the name. It was
Well, I know La La Land had that shocking
Ugh,
ending where you expected
yeah.
them to get together, and spoiler alert, that's
They don't.
not how it ended. But I think that's what makes 16 Candles work is, for the bulk of the movie, is it Claire? I think Molly played character Claire. I
Claire.
might have to look that up. But throughout the bulk of the movie, she's having a miserable day.
Awful.
Her family forgets her birthday. Her sister's getting married. And it's kind of brutal at first. You're like, man, she's just getting it from all sides.
Mhm.
There's the one scene where she's like, I can't believe I got felt up by my grandma. And then I think what makes 16 Candles works is that happy ending, that
Yes.
all the stuff that she went through. And there were some, even though it's a laugh out loud funny movie, there's some sincere moments like between her and her father where both her father and her mother apologize, like sincerely apologize for forgetting her birthday. And so the happy ending, I think, is what makes that movie work. If it didn't have that happy ending, I don't think it would have been as successful as it was.
No, probably not. But I think it's like you said. I think it's good too that a lot of these movies do have a happy ending. Just because some of them nowadays don't. And like you said, La La Land. There was one in particular where, oh, I don't know the name of it, and I don't even want to try to Google it up. But it has Jennifer Lawrence from The Hunger Games in it, which she's
Hmm.
like a very iconic actor of this time. And she's been in a lot of great films. But she kind of plays like this girl that is basically like paid to date this guy that's considered like the nerdy, like doesn't get love guy. And they don't end up together. And it kind of makes you sad because it does have a decent ending, but like
Yeah.
it goes all over the place. And
Mm.
I feel like for continuity's sake, I like the movies where you kind of know how it's going to end when it comes to the characters that you want to see together, because it just demolishes you as the viewer too. You're the audience and you're like, man, they're not even dating, they're not together, something horrible happened. And of course you have to have like the scene where the music starts to amplify and it really gives you the lovey-dovey feels. And it brings me back to high school, because when you have like your first real crush or whatever, your first date to homecoming, or for me, I didn't really do a lot of the whole dating thing in high school. I had like my best guy friend, and now we're together magically. Funny how that works. But he was like the nice guy that was he was a jock, but he was also kind of nerdy in his own way, loved video games. And so he had like the best of both worlds, he likes to
Yeah.
call it, I think, because he loved sports, but he also didn't want to always be in a crowd. He wasn't
Yeah.
always like the people person. And now he's a social butterfly, but I never gave him the chance. Now I feel bad. And so I kind of feel like it helped him though boost his confidence, because he would always say, "It's like I don't know why you choose me, or why don't you go find somebody that's more of your standards?" I'm like, "You are of my standards. You're so hard on yourself.
Yeah, I
It
hate the
breaks your
concept
heart."
of leagues. When someone's like you're out of her league or whatever, I'm like, I don't believe in that. You
No.
are who you are,
And
and
you got to embrace it, and your confidence matters too, because we all are so unique in our own individual ways, and we all deserve happiness and love. And there's somebody out there, I truly do believe that. But I think nowadays too, you rush into things too quickly, and a lot of these movies in the 80s, 90s just set the scene because they were just so feel good all the time.
yeah, and as much as I love a happy ending, you don't want every movie to be a Hallmark movie. Hallmark
Yeah,
movies are so predictable, and I know people love them. My sisters absolutely
my
love
mom.
them. And, the big city guy and the, small town girl or whatever, they're going to get together in the end. They always do. And, those can be entertaining, but I like when a movie kind of throws a twist at you like La La Land did.
Hmm.
They don't all have to be predictable all the time. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So let me ask you this, because you picked John Hughes. I know you said that the reason it sparked is because you watched 16 Candles a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
Like you rewatched it. Um, and I know you said that it had like a really big emotional impact on you and your family and everything. At that time, what were your feelings about these films? Is it the same as now, or when you go back to watch it, does it bring you back to that time?
Well, it's the longevity, the nostalgia is what makes these special. At the time, you're living it.
Mm-hmm.
The fashions are the fashions you see at school.
Right.
Now, when you watch a movie like, Breakfast Club, you're watching a time capsule from that period. I lived that time period. So at the time, you're not thinking about this capturing the moment that you're going through. It's only with the benefit of hindsight that you look back and go, man, these movies perfectly captured the 80s at that period. And that's what makes them so special. And what's so hard for me to believe? Like, as you and I sit here and talk about these movies that came out in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
that would be the equivalent of me back in the 80s talking to someone about the movies that came out in the 40s.
Yeah.
Like those in the 80s, those 40s movies were classics. Now we're looking back at the 80s the same way with that nostalgia that these movies were classics and sort of time capsules of that particular period. But that's why I love to revisit them, because they allow me to revisit that period where everything just seems so fun and innocent, and not like today. There's so much bad news and stress going on in the world. The 80s for me is kind of an escape because it was such an innocent time period.
I was going to say, I think the best feeling for me, and the reason why I should get into this because it is real and it's raw, and I think that's the best kind of conversation you can have, especially on a podcast. Um, Movies have always been my way to escape something.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, I think it's different for everyone. Like you said, it depends on what you're going through and where you're at in life. But for me, going to the theater, especially there was a time in high school where I was just trying to get through senior year and figure out what I wanted to do with college and everything, because there's always that pressure that kind of you feel on your shoulders, like, what am I going to do next? What is the next? Because you're so used to the now that you're like, what's the next? And I would go to the theater, and sometimes I'd even go by myself, and that sounds sad, but for me, it wasn't sad.
I always go by myself.
It
You're
wasn't
sitting in
sad.
a darkened room, so who
and you're
cares?
eating buttery popcorn and a slushie. Where can you go wrong, right? But there was something about it where it was an escape, because no matter what kind of movie you were seeing, you just left your own reality. You almost got to like leave your body and just enjoy something. There was no need to stress. There was no like, okay, now I need to turn off the TV and go to bed because I have class tomorrow or I have to go to work tomorrow. It was just, you're in the theater, you're eating a good snack, you're happy, you're learning about these new characters, you're feeling involved in the story somehow. I love a movie that can do that. And a lot of these, it's like that. Like The Breakfast Club, I feel like I could relate. I used the library scene in the halls, and I almost like mirrored it to my reality when I was in high school. And there's something about it that just brought me back. Like, you can almost smell what your school would smell like, the food, the different interactions, walking past people, your friends. And it was kind of nice, though, in The Breakfast Club, too, just to see that dynamic of how they were working with each other and realize that maybe we're not that different. I mean, I like that component in movies, too, is when you've got two characters that seem so far off, but then they realize there might be some sort of like, hey, we've all been through something, and we're all going to go through something.
There is that moment, though, in The Breakfast Club that, in a way, makes me sad a little bit, and I hope it, if these were real characters, I hope this wouldn't necessarily be the case, but there's a moment toward the end of the film when Anthony Michael Hall says to the group, come Monday, are we going to acknowledge each other in the hallways? Are we going to be friends after what we've gone through here today? And Molly Ringwald's character said, probably not. And I was like, really?
After the worst line of the whole movie.
Yeah, after, this bonding experience, she basically said that she's going to return to her clique and he should go back to his clique. And that kind of made me sad. You would think that, they learned from this experience and would share that with their friends and say, we all have something in common. And it just makes you wonder if come Monday, did they acknowledge each other's existence? That's something to think about.
It's like a cliffhanger in your own mind, too, because you're thinking about it in terms of, like, you get so emotionally attached to some of the characters. I mean, you really do.
Yeah.
And that's what's so great about actors and actresses is that they do a very great job of bringing a character to life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many movies, I'm sure your list is super long, where you can mention one actor in a time or that same actor that has played multiple roles. Like we talked a little bit about Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, Margot Robbie, who have played a variety of different roles, different types of people. And there's something so heroic about it, too, when you are in Hollywood and you are bringing these things to life, because it really touches the world. I mean, that's the one thing. There's always division between politics and what's going on in the world. But the one thing that kind of brings you together is some of these films. And you don't realize it all the time, but there's something about that. But it does make me really sad. I hope that they ended off connecting again in school, because I feel like I totally would have. After that, like, you're never going to forget that day. Are you? I don't know. I don't think so. But there's something good about it.
This might be a good time to segue into our little audio clip. So, you said, is there an actor that, portrays these roles that really speak to me? And obviously through the 80s, there's an actor who had a string of hits that most actors would be jealous of. We're talking about Anthony Michael Hall. And, watching those earlier movies, he seemed like an old soul trapped into the body of a 15 or 16-year-old. He seemed so wise beyond his years. And, he appeared in several John Hughes movies. And then he kind of, later on in his career, he kind of beefed up. And shockingly, he started playing the bully in some of these movies a little bit later. But I had the pleasure of meeting him at the Motor City Comic Con. and he was so nice to me because we actually worked together, if you can believe it. I'm going to mention it in this interview.
I'm so excited to hear this because I have
Yeah.
not, a little side note for her Hollywood highlights. I have not heard this interview yet, but when Joe told
Yeah.
me about it, I mean, like I said, he's the guy. Something big's got to come out of this because Joe Johnson has the coolest memories, the coolest people that he gets to meet.
Turn up number 6 on the board, and
Ooh, number 6 right here.
the array. Yep.
Yep.
And all right, so here's a little piece, an excerpt from my interview that I did with Anthony Michael Hall.
Here we go.
You have the most amazing IMDb page any actor would be jealous of. How did it happen at the beginning?
Well, I was so fortunate and blessed, Joe. I got to work with John from the age of 15 onward. And at 16 Candles was the first film, but before that, he had actually written Vacation. So it was just in the stars, you know. It was just a gift, honest to God, that I could work with him. And he wrote those first 4 films and directed, you know, obviously the 3 that we did together. So it's just a privilege to work for. Such a great guy, and he's missed, and I loved him. He gave me my whole career, the work that we did together, you know. And after that, it really became a career. I got, I think, a little too serious over the years, you know, and I realized how fortunate I was to work with John. I mean, it was such a gift.
When you reached adulthood, you were barely recognizable. You were beefed up and you were looking fantastic. What do you attribute to that? Was it just genetics, or?
Honestly, it was just growing up. I can't say I'm such a gym rat that I was that cool. I planned it. I just kind of grew into a bigger body, and I was a scrawny kid. You know, it's so funny because I'm 16 Candles. I look like I'm about 12 years old.
And finally, I have to bring this up. Anthony and I are co-workers, former co-workers.
Yeah.
We were both in a movie called 61, HBO production. Billy Crystal directed it. What are your memories of coming to Detroit and living and working here for 2 weeks working on that film?
Well, as you recall, it was such a great experience. I mean, he's one of the masters of our business, but such a good guy, so down to earth. And so I really studied him. I watched how he treated people. I watched how he worked as a filmmaker. I mean, if you recall, Joe, he was doing stand-up in between scenes. I mean, this guy gave it his all. So it was such a labor of love. And really a love letter to the Yankees and to Mickey Mantle, you know?
Yeah. Great seeing you again. Welcome back to Detroit. Hope you're having a great show.
It's been a great weekend. I just can't say enough about this town and the people, and it's all about everybody coming here and having a good time.
So imagine, you know, having the opportunity to not only meet, but have a conversation with one of your idols. And like I said, he had such a huge impact on me in the 80s with the movies that he did. His first one was Vacation. He was outstanding in Vacation. Now, John Hughes wrote that, but one of my favorite directors, Harold Ramis, directed Vacation, and that became one of my favorite movies. Then they reunited for 16 Candles, John Hughes and Anthony Michael Hall. Follow that up with The Breakfast Club, and then Weird Science, which is kind of a departure, you know, outside of the normal, you know, coming-of-age films. You get this wacky sci-fi, I guess, movie, you would call it. And that's when Anthony and Michael Hall started getting kind of lean and lanky before he beefed up. But it was really cool getting some insight into what it was like for him to work with John Hughes. Now, I just read something recently that said that as John Hughes was hanging out with Molly Ringwald and Anthony and Michael Hall and kind of bonding with them, he wanted those two to appear in all of his movies. He wanted...
Really?
He wanted... like back in the early days, like the 30s and 40s, you had Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney like appeared in everything together.
Yep.
And after, you know, doing 4 movies with John Hughes, Anthony Michael Hall was like, well, I kind of want to do other things. And Molly felt the same way. And I guess John Hughes was really, really hurt by that. And he kind of got away from the coming of age films. Now, obviously, he continued to write and direct films after that. But I guess he was heartbroken that the two actors wanted to grow up and go out on their own. And but, you know, no director in the 80s, maybe outside of Steven Spielberg, had such an impact on, you know, my teenage years, heading into my 20s in the 80s. He had such a huge impact on me, and it was just really cool to get a chance to talk to Anthony Michael Hall about that.
I'm really super grateful that you shared that interview, and I'm super grateful that we got to kind of revisit a time in your life that meant a lot, and to revisit those years in your life through these movies is a really great reflection of the type of writer, director, producer that John Hughes was, I think. And that you told me that they no longer would work with him. I mean, I can see how that's heartbreaking a little bit. When you have chemistry and you've worked with the same people for quite a few very successful movies, if I do say so, It kind of feels like part of you's missing, I feel like.
Yeah.
I don't know. You kind of envision them in different roles and different movies and different themes and everything. So I kind of relate to that. But I'm so, so grateful that this wild card episode, we could kind of touch on something that brings you close to home. Now, the last question I'm going to ask you, though, Joe, because I have to ask every week, would there be anything that you would change on any of these iconic films?
Well, I'm kind of glad that Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall went their separate ways, because that opened the doors for other actors to step in and take on roles in John Hughes movies that were wildly successful. And I wanted to rattle off a couple of titles before we sign off. After Weird Science, there was Pretty in Pink. Now, that had Molly Ringwald, but Anthony Michael Hall kind of stepped away at that point. And that became a classic. But then when Molly Ringwald went on to other things, we got Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is one of my all-time favorite films, probably top 20, with Matthew Broderick. And I just met last weekend Alan Ruck, who played Cameron in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I had him sign a little die-cast car of that red Ferrari that appears in the film. But I can't imagine Ferris Bueller with any other actors. Like Matthew Broderick was so great in it, and so was Alan Ruck, and that was great. And then I don't have many memories of Some Kind of Wonderful, but let's talk about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. You touched on it. Yes, Thanksgiving is right around the corner, and that is such a great movie about trying to get home for the holidays and running into obstacles. And
it's so relatable too, though.
Yeah.
It's seriously so relatable, because I swear, especially when you have family that lives, like I've got cousins that live in Florida, and during the holiday season, I feel like this is such a real thing that happens, and there's the frustration and the tension, but it's such a real movie. But Thanksgiving deserves a few movies too. Christmas has so many, so it was kind of nice that he made this movie, and I think he did a really great job doing.
Oh, it's you got to rewatch it every Thanksgiving, and then he followed it up with She's Having a Baby, which has an amazing soundtrack. That's one thing about John Hughes movies is the music in all of these movies.
I agree.
Oh my God! Last Christmas, my sister had asked for vinyl records. She bought a vinyl record turntable, and she asked for vinyl records for Christmas. And I found the best of John Hughes movies, like all the different.
Where did you find that?
At Second and Charles in Auburn Hills, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so perfect. So it had songs from all the different John Hughes movies on one like double vinyl album. It was really awesome. So the music is always great.
That would immerse you into all the films, because you'd be like, oh, that's from that. I remember that. I remember hearing of that song. Yes.
Oh, those were great. And then, of course, after Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, he teamed up with John Candy and did, The Great Outdoors and Uncle Buck. Those are great movies. And then one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Yes.
I didn't know what to expect with that movie, because after the original Vacation, they did European Vacation, which wasn't all that great. And I remember my family was like, well, let's go see a Christmas movie. And we went to go see Christmas Vacation with low expectations. And it was just great with Cousin Eddie and his RV.
Yes.
Don't go falling in love with it, because we're going to be taking it with us when we leave here next month. And then, of course, Home Alone, which became a Christmas classic. And we could go on and on and on. His career just kept going and going.
Dennis
and going.
the Menace, that one, I made my boyfriend watch it. This had to have been a few months ago. I think it was in the summer. It came out on Netflix or one of the streaming services. No, it was Hulu, I think. And Dennis the Menace was on, and Bryce is like, what's this about? And I'm like, you've never seen this movie? Oh my goodness. And so that one is a really feel good. There's just a lot of them that are feel good for me, and you can watch them over and over again. I don't think they ever grow old, and that's what I really like about John Hughes. Is none of his stories ever grow old. You can rewatch them and still get the same feelings, and that to me is what really makes somebody stand out in the film industry, is when you can create something that we hold so near and dear to our heart, and that you kind of immerse yourself into the stories. It's the best thing in the world.
You're right. They're timeless. And even though, a lot of those depict 80s fashions and stuff, you can go back and watch those movies like you would, Jimmy Stewart or Cary Grant movies, where you just never tire of them. You watch them over and over and over. And then, the sad footnote to this whole thing is that, we lost him at a fairly young age. It's really unfortunate. And, you can't help but think about what movies he still had in him when he passed away. He died at like 59, I think, which is just way too
Way
young.
too young.
But luckily he left us this legacy of classic movies. And like you said, when I'm immersed in a darkened movie theater watching these movies, like, how do you take in the world? You take in the world through your eyes and your ears and your sense of touch.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I watch movies in a darkened movie theater, they become part of me. They become these vivid memories that, help make up my DNA. And these movies
Mm-hmm.
become part of me. And when me and friends and family get together, you can't help but quote a lot of these movies. And, you get into certain situations where you're like, oh my God, this is just like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This is just like 16 Candles, So he left a legacy that he could be proud of. And it's sad that he's gone, but you could always sit down and watch any one of his movies.
Oh, 100%. And I'm so glad that we could talk about this because, I always tell you that I wish I could have lived in the 80s. And so to see that and to hear that he depicted these movies so well and brought everything to life, I kind of feel like I can go back to that time and actually live through it, which that's a powerful thing, too, is to see how culture and society and everything has shifted since then. Because I just hear so many great things about the 80s and 90s. And when these movies came out, man, I would have loved to just go to the theater or go rent the movie at a, what was it, Blockbuster?
Blockbuster,
That's
yeah,
no longer
or
with us.
cable TV. They'd show these movies over and over and over again on
The
cable
reruns,
TV.
but they were so worth it. And then,
Yeah.
primetime on Sunday nights, they'd always play during the holidays, I remember. It'd be like a nice Christmas lineup, and that was the
Mhm.
nostalgia. And believe it or not, the best part of it was, too, turning on the TV, like, Christmas Eve and being with your family, or even if you were, alone, like, sometimes it's hard for some of my family members because they might live further away now, and so you don't get to see them as much, or they have got other things going on, and so it kind of makes them feel like they're still with us, and they can send like a meme through text message from one of these movies, and you just get a kick out of it because it brings you back, and you just feel somehow united again. So it's great that
Exactly.
movies can do that.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, I'm so grateful that you had that interview with Anthony Michael Hall. I'm so grateful, too, that you got to meet him because I know how much he means to you. And after hearing about all these stories and just learning about the history of who John Hughes was and how he was able to bring all of these films to life, it was super exciting today. So thank you so much for suggesting this for this Wildcard episode. I know we were hinting some Christmas holiday vibes today.
Yeah.
So I think for the next podcast, we're gonna dive into the Die Hard series, which now I think
The
is
ultimate
a
Christmas movie.
And I think Joe's like agree to disagree on that one. But I think it'll be fun because those movies, especially with everything going on with Bruce Willis right now and his health declining pretty rapidly, which is really sad.
Yeah.
I want to pay tribute to him because John McClane, he was like the role model for a lot of cop films, I still think, and a lot of movies try to be Die Hard, the original, but I don't think they'll ever touch that.
Yeah, there were a lot of movies that came out afterward that were like Die Hard on a plane and Die Hard on a train. And yeah, but nothing beats the original Die Hard. And I can tell you right now, don't ask me what I would change about this movie because Die Hard,
Nothing.
in my opinion, is a perfect movie. It's
It is.
absolutely perfect. Love everything about it.
It will always go down in history for me, and I will make sure that my kids one day know John McClane and watch the movies because that's what my dad did to me. Is he would say, Lexi, I want you to see this part of history from because that's where I got my movie love from. Is my dad loves movies. He's a lot like Joe in the sense that he wants to visit a lot of historical places because of films being produced there and everything.
And if I do get a chance to ever show you around L.A., we will go to the Nakatomi Plaza.
Yes, that would be the coolest. But especially like I want to see like the little office, and then obviously I'm sure when they were doing the actual. Do you know if they had the renovations? Were those actually being done? Or was
Yeah. The building wasn't finished yet when they were filming there, so
That's
a lot
where
of
I'd
those
wanna
construction
be.
areas were actually under construction. Yeah.
They just picked the perfect building. You're right. You could not change one thing. And I liked the second one too. I know it had to deal with the airport during the holidays again, which was kind of iconic. And then the third one, we had Samuel L. Jackson join, which, I mean, he is an icon of the time too. So
Yeah.
that one with the whole Simon Says, I kind of liked that theme. But I definitely think that the last 2 installments of it, I do have critiques on those, but we don't need to talk about that today.
All right.
We will see you next time here on Her Hollywood Highlights. We appreciate you so much for listening, and stay tuned for Die Hard coming out soon.